The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September 1882, and Lydia Vance watched through her kitchen window as the courier rode away, leaving nothing but dust and disappointment in his wake. She was 38 years old, owned a thriving general store in Trinidad, Colorado, and had just been rejected by a mail-order groom who had taken one look at her photograph and written back that he was seeking someone younger, someone who could give him many years and many children. The words stung worse than any physical blow, and Lydia found herself crumpling the letter in her fist as tears threatened to spill down her cheeks. She had built everything herself after her first husband died of influenza 6 years ago, transforming a small, struggling shop into the most successful mercantile between Denver and Santa Fe. Her shelves were always stocked, her prices fair, and her reputation spotless. But none of that mattered when men looked at the lines around her eyes and decided she was past her prime. The mail-order groom had been her third attempt at finding companionship, and his rejection felt like the final nail in the coffin of her romantic hopes. Lydia wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. She had inventory to manage and customers to serve, and she would not let some stranger's shallow judgment ruin her day. She tucked the letter into her apron pocket and walked through the connecting door from her living quarters into the store, where the morning light streamed through the large front windows and illuminated rows of dry goods, tools, fabric, and sundries. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up to see a tall man entering, his hat in his hands. He was broad-shouldered and lean, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. Lydia judged him to be in his early 40s, though it was hard to tell with cowboys who spent their lives under the harsh Colorado sun. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice deep and warm. "I am looking for some supplies. Heard yours is the best store in Trinidad." "You heard right," Lydia replied, forcing brightness into her tone. "What do you need?" "Flour, coffee, beans, salt pork, and ammunition for a Winchester," he said, approaching the counter. "And if you have got any of those peppermint sticks, I would take a few of those too." Lydia began gathering his items, aware of his eyes following her movements. She was a handsome woman still, with thick auburn hair she wore in a practical bun, and a figure that had filled out pleasantly over the years. But the letter in her pocket felt like a weight, reminding her that handsome was not the same as young. "You are new in town," she observed, reaching for a tin of coffee from the shelf behind her. "Just arrived yesterday," he confirmed. "Name is Parker Ashford. I have been working ranches up north, but I heard the Rockingham was hiring. Figured Colorado might suit me better than Wyoming winters." "The Rockingham is a good outfit," Lydia said, setting the coffee on the counter. "Owner is Marcus Reynolds. Fair man, pays his hands well. You will be about 6 miles south of town." "That is what I heard." Parker watched as she measured out flour into a cloth sack. "And you are Lydia Vance." "I own this establishment. All by yourself?" His eyebrows rose, impressed rather than skeptical. "All by myself," she confirmed. "My late husband and I started it together, but I have been running it alone for 6 years now." "That is mighty impressive," Parker said, and something in his tone made her glance up. He was looking at her with genuine admiration, not the patronizing surprise she sometimes got from men who thought women were incapable of business. "Takes real skill and determination to make a success of a place like this." Lydia felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the September heat. "Thank you. That is kind of you to say." She finished gathering his supplies and tallied the cost. Parker paid without haggling, counted out exact change, and then paused, holding one of the peppermint sticks. Would you care for one, Mrs. Vance? Seems only polite since you have been so helpful. I am not married anymore, Lydia said, the words escaping before she could stop them. And yes, I would like that. Thank you. Parker handed her the candy and their fingers brushed briefly. Lydia felt an unexpected jolt at the contact, and from the way his eyes widened slightly, she thought he might have felt it too. But she pushed the feeling away, reminding herself not to be foolish. He was just being friendly, nothing more. I imagine I will be back soon, Parker said, gathering his supplies. Seems like a man could find everything he needs in a place like this. I certainly try to keep it well stocked, Lydia replied, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. You are welcome anytime. After he left, Lydia found herself standing at the counter longer than necessary, absently unwrapping the peppermint stick. The sweetness burst across her tongue, and she realized she was smiling. Then she remembered the letter in her pocket, and the smile faded. She was being ridiculous, reading something into a simple, friendly exchange that was not there. Parker Ashford was probably 20 years younger than her, or at least 10, and even if he was not, he had given no indication he saw her as anything but a shopkeeper. The days that followed fell into their usual rhythm. Lydia rose before dawn, opened the store at 7, served customers throughout the day, closed at 6, and spent her evenings doing bookkeeping by lamplight. It was a satisfying life, if a lonely one. She had friends in Trinidad, was respected in the community, and had more financial security than most women could dream of. But at night, lying alone in her bed, she could not help but wish for someone to share it all with. Parker Ashford came back to the store 3 days later, this time for rope and leather working supplies. The next week he returned for tobacco and a new shirt. The week after that, he needed nails and turpentine. Lydia began to suspect he was finding excuses to visit, but she told herself she was imagining things. Cowboys always needed supplies, that was all. It was on his 4th visit that things shifted. Lydia was restocking shelves when he arrived, standing on a ladder to reach the higher spots. She heard the bell and called out, "I will be right with you." "No hurry," Parker's familiar voice replied. "Though you might want to move that ladder a bit. It is sitting uneven on those floorboards." Even as he spoke, Lydia felt the ladder wobble. She gasped, grabbing for the shelf, but her fingers slipped. She braced for a painful impact with the floor, but instead found herself caught in strong arms. Parker had crossed the store in seconds and caught her as neatly as if she weighed nothing at all. "Got you," he said, his face inches from hers. Lydia's heart hammered in her chest, though whether from the near fall or from being held against Parker's solid chest, she could not say. She could smell leather and soap and something uniquely him, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. His arms were secure around her, and his eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. "Thank you," she managed, her voice coming out embarrassingly breathy. "That could have been quite nasty." "Cannot have the best shopkeeper in Colorado getting hurt on my watch," Parker said, but he did not immediately set her down. Instead, he carried her a few steps and gently placed her on her feet beside the counter, his hands lingering at her waist to make sure she was steady. "You all right?" "Yes, perfectly fine," Lydia said, smoothing her skirts and trying to regain her composure. "My pride is more bruised than anything else." "Nothing wrong with your pride," Parker said quietly. "Happens to everyone. That ladder has been rickety since I first came in. You ought to get a new one." "I know I keep meaning to," Lydia admitted. "It is on my list." "I could build you one," Parker offered. "I am handy with woodworking, did a lot of it on the ranch up in Wyoming." "I could not ask you to do that," Lydia protested. "You must be exhausted after working all day at the Rockingham." "It would not be asking if I am offering," Parker pointed out with a slight smile. "Besides, I enjoy the work. Gives me something to do besides sit around the bunkhouse playing cards." Lydia found herself agreeing before she had fully thought it through. There was something about Parker that made her want to say yes, to take chances she normally would not. Over the following weeks, he came by in the evenings after his ranch work was done, bringing lumber and tools. He built her not just a ladder, but also reinforced shelving and repaired the front steps that had been developing an alarming squeak. They fell into an easy companionship during those autumn evenings. Lydia would bring coffee and sometimes supper, and they would talk while Parker worked. She learned he was 41 years old, had been born in Missouri, and had been moving west since he was 18. He had worked cattle drives, broken horses, and even spent a year as a deputy in a Kansas town before deciding law enforcement was not for him. "Too much politics," he explained one evening, sanding down a rough edge on the new ladder. "I just wanted to keep people safe, but the sheriff wanted me to look the other way when his friends caused trouble. Did not sit right with me." "So you left," Lydia said, admiring his principles. "So I left," Parker confirmed. "Figured I would rather be poor and able to look at myself in the mirror than rich and ashamed." Lydia told him about her own journey, how she had married young to a good man who had been 15 years her senior. They had been happy together, built the store from nothing, but had never been able to have children. When he died, some people expected her to sell the business and return to her family back east, but she had refused. Trinidad was her home now, and the store was her legacy. "My sister keeps writing, telling me I should move back to Philadelphia," Lydia said one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. They were sitting on the newly repaired front steps, coffee mugs in hand. "She says there is nothing here for me but hard work and loneliness." "Is she right?" Parker asked quietly. "Are you lonely?" Lydia considered lying, but something about the gentle understanding in his eyes made her want to be honest. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I love what I have built here and I love this town, but yes, sometimes I am very lonely." Parker nodded slowly. "I know something about that. When you spend most of your life moving from place to place, never putting down roots, you can be surrounded by people and still feel alone." "Is that why you came to Trinidad?" Lydia asked. "Were you looking to put down roots?" "Maybe," Parker said, and his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Or maybe I was looking for something else and just did not know it until I found it." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Lydia wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to believe he was talking about her, but fear held her tongue. The letter from the mail-order Groom still haunted her, a reminder that men did not see her as a romantic prospect anymore. She was too old, past her prime, useful for running a store but not for warming a bed or building a future with. Before she could respond, a commotion down the street broke the spell. A group of cowboys from one of the other ranches were causing trouble at the saloon, and Parker rose to his feet, automatically moving to intervene. Lydia watched him help the local deputy calm the situation, his quiet authority diffusing what could have become a nasty brawl. When he returned, the intimate mood had passed, and they said their good nights with careful politeness. October arrived with crisp mornings and earlier sunsets. The aspens in the mountains turned gold, and Trinidad prepared for the coming winter. Lydia ordered extra supplies to stock up before the snow made deliveries difficult, and the store was busier than ever. Parker continued to visit regularly, always finding some reason to stop by, and Lydia found herself watching for him, her heart lifting every time the bell above the door announced a new customer. It was on a chilly afternoon in mid-October that everything changed. Lydia was helping Mrs. Henderson select fabric when a stranger entered the store. He was well dressed in city clothes with a neatly trimmed beard and calculating eyes. Something about him immediately put Lydia on edge. "Mrs. Vance?" he inquired, approaching the counter. "Yes, I am Lydia Vance," she confirmed, finishing with Mrs. Henderson and turning her attention to the stranger. "How may I help you?" "My name is Chester Morrison," he said, removing his hat. "I represent a mercantile company out of Denver. We have been expanding into smaller towns, and we are very interested in acquiring your establishment." Lydia blinked in surprise. "My store is not for sale, Mr. Morrison." "Everything is for sale at the right price, madam," Morrison said with an oily smile. "We are prepared to make you a very generous offer. You could retire comfortably, perhaps move back east to be with your family. A woman alone has no business trying to run a commercial enterprise anyway. It is too much for the weaker sex to manage." Anger flared hot in Lydia's chest. "I have been managing just fine for 6 years, Mr. Morrison, and as I said, my store is not for sale at any price. Now, if you will excuse me, I have customers to attend to." Morrison's smile disappeared. "You might want to reconsider, Mrs. Vance. We are opening a store in Trinidad either way, whether we buy yours or build our own. And when we do, we will have lower prices and more selection than you could ever hope to match. Within 6 months, you will be out of business anyway. Selling now would be the smart choice." "The door is behind you," Lydia said coldly. "Good day, Mr. Morrison." After he left, Lydia stood trembling with anger and fear. She knew he was not bluffing. Large companies from Denver and Colorado Springs had been moving into smaller towns, driving local businesses under with practices she could not hope to compete with. If Morrison's company opened a store in Trinidad, it very well might destroy everything she had built. That evening, Parker found her sitting in the darkened store, staring at nothing. He had let himself in through the back door, which she always left unlocked for him now, and crossed to where she sat without a word. He simply pulled up a chair beside her and waited. "A man came today," Lydia finally said, and told him about Morrison's visit. "He is right, Parker. If they open a competing store with Denver money behind them, I will lose everything. This store is all I have, all I am. Without it, I am just a lonely middle-aged woman with nothing to show for her life. Now that is just about the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard," Parker said with such vehemence that Lydia looked at him in surprise. "You are one of the smartest, strongest, most capable people I have ever met, Lydia Vance. Man or woman, young or old, it does not matter. You built something real here, something that matters to this community. And you are so much more than your store. You are kind and funny and interesting. You are beautiful and graceful, and you have got the prettiest smile I have ever seen. Any man who cannot see that is a fool, and any company that thinks they can just come in and erase what you have built is in for a rude awakening." Lydia stared at him, her heart pounding. "Parker, I have been trying to work up the courage to say something for weeks now," Parker continued, reaching for her hand. "But I am done being a coward. Lydia, I think I have been falling in love with you since the first day I walked into this store. You are perfect exactly as you are at exactly this age, and I cannot imagine wanting anyone else. But I am old," Lydia whispered, even as hope bloomed in her chest. "I am 38 years old. I cannot give you children, or at least it is unlikely. I have wrinkles and gray hairs I have to pluck out, and I am set in my ways. There are younger women, prettier women." Parker stood abruptly and pulled her to her feet, his hands framing her face. "Stop," he said firmly. "Just stop. I do not want younger or different. I want you. Every age you have ever been led you to right here, right now, and you are perfect at every single one, including this one. Do you understand me?" Tears spilled down Lydia's cheeks, but for once they were not tears of sadness or rejection. "I have been falling in love with you too," she admitted. "But I was afraid. A man wrote to me, someone I had been corresponding with as a potential husband. He said I was too old, that he wanted someone younger, and I believed him. I thought no one would ever want me again." "Then he is the biggest fool I have ever heard of," Parker said, and then he was kissing her. It was not a gentle, tentative kiss. It was passionate and claiming, full of all the weeks of longing and restraint. Lydia melted into him, her arms winding around his neck, kissing him back with equal fervor. He tasted like coffee and peppermint, and his arms around her made her feel safe and desired in a way she had not felt in years. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Parker rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, but I am sure. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Marry me, Lydia, and let me spend the rest of my days proving to you how perfect you are." "Yes," Lydia breathed, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Parker, I will marry you." They married 3 weeks later in Trinidad's small church, with half the town in attendance. Lydia wore a dress of deep blue silk that she had been saving for a special occasion, and Parker wore a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable. Marcus Reynolds stood as his best man, and Lydia's friend Sarah Chen, who ran the boarding house, served as her matron of honor. As they exchanged vows, Lydia felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This man, with his storm-gray eyes and gentle strength, was meant to be hers. And she was meant to be his, not in spite of her age, but because of everything those years had made her. The problem of Morrison's competing store still loomed, but Lydia found she faced it with renewed determination now that she was not alone. Parker moved into her quarters above the store, and together they strategized. They could not compete on price with a Denver company, but they could offer something the big stores could not: personal service, community connection, and genuine care for their customers. Parker proved to be a natural businessman, his years of experience on different ranches having given him insights into what working men really needed. He suggested they expand their stock of quality tools and durable work clothes, items that might cost more initially but would last longer. He also proposed offering credit to trusted customers, something the big company stores rarely did. "People remember kindness," Parker said one evening as they worked on the store's ledgers together. "They remember when someone helped them through a hard time. That is worth more than saving a few pennies." Morrison's company did open their store in early November, a gleaming new building on the opposite end of town with bright signs advertising low prices. For a few weeks, Lydia watched nervously as some of her customers went to investigate the competition, but slowly, surely, most of them came back. "Their goods are cheap, but they are also cheaply made," one rancher told her. "And nobody there knows my name or cares about my family. I would rather give my money to folks who are part of this community." By December, it was clear that Lydia's store would survive. Morrison's company store was doing adequate business, but they had not driven her under as he had threatened. And Lydia had something more precious than business success. She had Parker. Marriage to Parker was everything Lydia had never dared to hope for. He was affectionate and thoughtful, funny and passionate. He made her laugh with stories of his cowboy adventures, listened intently when she talked about her business concerns, and held her close every night as if she were something precious and breakable. He told her constantly that she was beautiful, and the way he looked at her made her believe it. In late December, during the quiet between Christmas and New Year, Parker surprised her with a gift. He had been working on it secretly in the rocking Mtikes woodshop, and when he led her downstairs on a cold winter morning, she found a beautiful hand-carved sign hanging above the store entrance. Instead of the simple Vance Mercantile it had displayed before, it now read Vance and Ashford General Store ESD, 1876. "I know you built this place," Parker said, watching her face carefully. "And I know it is your legacy, but I am hoping we can build the next chapter together. What do you think?" Lydia threw her arms around his neck, too moved to speak for a moment. Finally she managed, "I think it is perfect. You are perfect." "We are perfect together," Parker corrected, kissing her soundly. The new year of 1883 arrived with fresh snow and fresh possibilities. Lydia and Parker fell into a comfortable rhythm of running the store together. He handled the heavier work, and often dealt with the ranchers and cowboys who preferred doing business with another man, though he always made sure they understood that Lydia was the boss and the brains behind the operation. Lydia managed the books, made the purchasing decisions, and maintained the relationships with suppliers that she had cultivated over years. In February, Lydia realized she was pregnant. At 38, she had thought her childbearing years were over, had made peace with the idea of never being a mother. When the doctor confirmed her suspicion, she sat in his office stunned, unable to process the information. She told Parker that evening, terrified of how he might react. They had never discussed children, and she had assumed he knew it was unlikely at her age. What if he was disappointed? What if this was too much, too soon? Parker's reaction dispelled all her fears. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, wonder, and then pure joy before he let out a whoop and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the room despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "Lydia, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear it. "Truly happy. I know we did not plan this, and I am old to be having a first child." "The doctor says there are risks. I am happier than I have ever been in my entire life," Parker interrupted, setting her down gently and cupping her face in his hands. "You and this baby are everything I have ever wanted and did not know I was looking for. And you are not old, you are experienced and wise and strong enough to handle anything. We are going to be wonderful parents together." The pregnancy was not easy. Lydia suffered from morning sickness well into her 4th month, and as summer arrived, the heat made her swell and ache. But Parker was endlessly patient and attentive, taking on more of the store work so she could rest, rubbing her feet in the evenings, and never once complaining about the disruption to their life. The baby arrived on a sweltering August afternoon, after 12 hours of labor that left Lydia exhausted but triumphant. Parker had paced outside the bedroom where the doctor and Sarah Chen attended her, and when he was finally allowed in to meet his son, tears streamed openly down his weathered face. "A boy," he said in wonder, carefully taking the tiny bundle from Lydia's arms. "We have a son." They named him Samuel Parker Ashford, and he had his mother's auburn hair and his father's gray eyes. Parker was besotted from the first moment, and Lydia fell in love with him all over again watching him with their child. He was a natural father, patient and gentle, singing soft cowboy ballads to soothe the baby when he fussed and walking the floor with him for hours so Lydia could sleep. Running the store with an infant was challenging, but they made it work. Lydia set up a cradle behind the counter where Samuel could nap, and customers took delight in visiting the newest member of Trinidad's community. Parker juggled his ranch work with store duties and fatherhood, and somehow they managed it all. When Samuel was 6 months old, Morrison returned. Lydia was nursing the baby in the back room when she heard raised voices and emerged to find Parker facing down the Denver businessman. "Your store has failed to achieve the market dominance we projected," Morrison was saying. My company is prepared to make one final offer to purchase your establishment. It is less than our original offer, but more than you will get from anyone else once we implement our new pricing strategy. Let me make this real simple for you, Parker said, his voice deceptively calm. My wife already told you no. That answer has not changed and it is not going to change. Now you can walk out of here on your own or I can help you. Your choice. Morrison's face reddened. You are making a mistake. We will crush you eventually. You have been trying for almost a year now and we are still here, Lydia said, emerging with Samuel on her hip. Trinidad is not Denver, Mr. Morrison. People here care about more than just the lowest price. They care about community and relationships and supporting their neighbors. You are never going to understand that, which is why you are never going to succeed here. Morrison left in a huff, and they never saw him again. A month later, they heard that his company's store had closed, unable to make enough profit to justify keeping it open. It was a quiet victory, but a sweet one. The years that followed were the happiest of Lydia's life. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic little boy with his father's easy smile and his mother's head for figures. When he was 3, Lydia gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Grace, who had their father's dark hair and their mother's green eyes. Parker had left the rocking M by then to work at the store full-time, and together they expanded the business, adding a catalog service and even beginning to supply some of the smaller mining camps in the mountains. On a cool September evening in 1888, 6 years after they first met, Lydia and Parker sat on their front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Samuel was playing in the yard with a wooden horse Parker had carved for him, and the twins were napping inside. Business was good, their family was healthy, and life felt abundantly full. You ever regret it? Lydia asked, taking Parker's hand. Marrying an older woman, missing out on more years together because I am not young. Parker turned to look at her, his eyes holding the same intensity they had that first day he caught her falling from the ladder. Not for a single second, he said firmly. You listened to me, Lydia Ashford. Every year you lived before I met you made you who you are. Every experience, every joy, every hardship shaped you into the woman I fell in love with. You could not be you at any other age, and I would not want you to be. You are perfect exactly as you are, exactly the age you are, and I thank God every single day that I walked into your store when I did. Lydia's eyes filled with tears, the good kind that came from being deeply, truly loved. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, Parker replied, pulling her close and kissing her temple. At every age and every season for all the years we have got left. You are perfect, Lydia. You always were. As the sun dipped below the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Lydia rested her head on her husband's shoulder and felt a profound sense of peace. She had been rejected by a mail-order groom who thought her too old, too used up to be worth his time. But that rejection had led her to Parker, a true cowboy who saw her worth and loved her not in spite of her age, but because of everything those years had made her. She thought about the letter she had received all those years ago, the one that had made her feel worthless and past her prime. She had burned it long ago, but she still remembered the sting of those words. Now, surrounded by her family and her thriving business, married to a man who cherished her completely, she understood the truth. She had never been too old. She had simply been waiting for the right man to come along, one who appreciated vintage wine over cheap whiskey, who understood that some things only got better with time. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of challenges and joys. Samuel grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's way with horses and his mother's business sense. The twins were precocious and inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief that kept their parents on their toes. In 1891, Lydia gave birth to one more surprise, another son they named Thomas, and Parker joked that she was single-handedly ensuring Trinidad's next generation. The store continued to thrive, becoming not just a business but a community institution. Parker's idea of extending credit to struggling families during hard times paid off in loyalty and goodwill. When a fire destroyed the Martinez family's home, Vance and Ashford General Store became a collection point for donations and supplies. When the railroad finally came through Trinidad in 1889, bringing new growth and opportunities, their store was positioned perfectly to take advantage of the increased traffic. Lydia sometimes thought about the woman she had been before Parker, sitting alone in her darkened store, convinced that her best years were behind her. It seemed like a different lifetime, a different person. Parker had not just given her love. He had given her back her confidence, her sense of possibility, her belief that she was worthy of good things. And in return, she had given him the roots and family he had been searching for his whole life without knowing it. On their 10th wedding anniversary in November 1892, Parker surprised her with a trip. They left the children with Sarah Chen and rode up into the mountains to a small cabin he had built in secret over the summer months, enlisting the help of his friends from the Rockingham. It was simple but beautiful, with a stone fireplace and windows that looked out over the valley. "I thought we could use a place to escape to sometimes," Parker explained as they stood on the porch watching snow begin to fall. "Just the two of us, when the store and the children get to be too much. A place where we can remember who we were before we were parents and business owners. We were two lonely people who found each other," Lydia said, wrapping her arms around his waist. "And now look at what we have built." "I knew from that first day," Parker said, holding her close. "When I caught you falling from that ladder, I knew you were going to change my life. I was so sure you would never see me as anything but a shopkeeper," Lydia admitted. "An older woman, past her prime, too set in her ways to be interesting to a man like you." Parker pulled back to look at her seriously. "I am going to tell you something I have never told you before," he said. "That first day I came into your store, I was not actually looking for supplies. I had everything I needed. But I had been in town for 2 days and I kept seeing you through the window, working in your store, and I was fascinated. You moved with such purpose and confidence, and when you smiled at customers, your whole face lit up. So I invented an excuse to come in and meet you. And then I kept inventing excuses because I could not stay away." Lydia laughed in delighted surprise. "You liar! You said you heard mine was the best store in Trinidad." "It was not a lie. People did say that," Parker defended with a grin. "I just did not mention that I had already bought everything I supposedly needed from the other shop the day before. I gave most of those supplies away and came to you instead." "Parker Ashford, you are terrible," Lydia said, but she was smiling. "All this time and you never told me." "I am telling you now," he said, gathering her close again. "I wanted you to understand that I have been choosing you since the very beginning, Lydia. Not settling for you, not making do, but actively choosing you because you were exactly what I wanted. At 38, at 48, at 108, you would still be exactly what I want." They spent 3 glorious days in that cabin, reconnecting as a couple away from the demands of their busy life. They talked and laughed and made love by firelight, and Lydia felt young and cherished and deeply content. When they returned to Trinidad, she felt renewed and ready to face whatever came next. The next years brought the usual mix of triumphs and sorrows that make up a life. They lost Sarah Chen to pneumonia in 1894, and Lydia grieved deeply for her friend. Samuel broke his arm falling from a horse, giving them all a terrible fright, but recovered completely. The twins started school and proved to be brilliant students. Thomas grew into a charming, mischievous little boy who could talk his way out of any trouble. Parker's hair went completely gray, and Lydia found she liked it even better that way. Her own hair followed suit, and she stopped plucking out the silver strands, letting them weave through the auburn in a way Parker said made her look like autumn itself. The lines around their eyes deepened, their bodies grew less limber, but their love only strengthened. In 1898, when Lydia was 54 years old, Samuel announced he wanted to join the army. It was during the Spanish-American War, and many young men were swept up in patriotic fervor. Lydia wanted to forbid it, to keep her firstborn safe at home, but Parker counseled patience. "He is 18, Parker reminded her gently. "The same age I was when I left Missouri. We have to let him make his own choices, even when they scare us." Samuel served for 2 years and came home safely, more mature and serious but still fundamentally the boy they had raised. He returned to Trinidad and began courting the schoolteacher, a smart young woman named Alice who reminded Lydia of herself. When they married in 1901, Lydia gained the daughter she had never had, and the two women became close friends. The new century brought changes to Trinidad and to their lives. Automobiles began appearing on the streets, though Parker swore he would never trust a machine over a good horse. The store had to adapt, adding new products for a modernizing world while maintaining the personal touch that had always been their strength. They hired help as they got older, training young people in the business and creating jobs for Trinidad's growing population. Emma married a rancher and moved to Montana, while Grace surprised everyone by going to Denver to study nursing. Thomas, their baby, showed a talent for music and began playing piano in the saloons, to his mother's mixed pride and concern. They remained close despite the distance, coming together for holidays and important occasions. On a summer evening in 1905, Lydia and Parker celebrated their 23rd anniversary quietly at the cabin in the mountains. They were in their 60s now, officially old by any measure, but they still held hands like newlyweds and still found reasons to laugh every day. "You know what I was thinking about today," Lydia said as they sat watching the sunset, much as they had 23 years earlier in Trinidad. "That letter, the one from the mail-order groom who said I was too old." "That fool," Parker said with a snort. "No, I am glad he did," Lydia said. "Because if he had not, I might have married him. I might have settled for someone who saw me as a compromise, a second choice, and then I never would have met you. I never would have known what it felt like to be loved exactly as I am." Parker took her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I am the one who got lucky," he said. "You gave me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a family, a purpose, and a love that has only gotten deeper and richer with every year." "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" Lydia asked. "When I told you about the letter, I said you were perfect at every age, including that one," Parker recalled. "And I meant it then, and I mean it now. You are perfect at 61, just like you were perfect at 38. Every year with you has been a gift, Lydia." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared and stars emerged, bright in the clear mountain air. Lydia thought about the journey that had brought them here, all the twists and turns that had seemed like disasters at the time but had led her exactly where she needed to be. She had been rejected, called too old, made to feel like her value had expired. But Parker had seen the truth. She was not too old, she was not past her prime, she was not less than. She was exactly right, exactly enough, exactly perfect as she was. And that belief had not wavered in 23 years of marriage, 4 children, countless challenges, and all the ordinary wear and tear of building a life together. "What are you thinking?" Parker asked, noticing her faraway expression. "I am thinking that I am grateful," Lydia said simply. "For all of it. For the rejection that brought me to you, for every gray hair and wrinkle we have earned together, for every morning I wake up beside you. I am grateful for every single day." "Me too," Parker said, pulling her close. "Every single day." They returned to Trinidad the next morning to find that their grandson, Samuel and Alice's boy, had taken his first steps. Life continued in its beautiful, relentless way, bringing new joys and new generations. Lydia and Parker grew older together, eventually retiring from the daily operation of the store and turning it over to Samuel and Alice, though they still came by most days to help and to visit with customers who had become friends. When Lydia was 72 years old, she received a letter from Philadelphia. Her sister had passed away, and the family wanted her to come back east for the funeral. Lydia had not seen her sister in over 30 years, and she made the long train journey with Parker at her side, as he had been for everything important in her life. At the funeral, distant cousins and relatives she barely remembered looked at her with pity. A woman alone would have been cause for concern, a figure to be pitied, but Lydia was not alone. Parker stood beside her, his hand at the small of her back, introducing himself with quiet pride as her husband. And when they talked about her life, Lydia spoke of her thriving business, her 4 successful children, her grandchildren, the community she had helped build in Trinidad. "You must have married very young," one cousin said, looking between Lydia and Parker with confusion. "No," Lydia said with a smile. "I married at 38, which was exactly the right time for me." "But that is so late," the cousin protested. "You must have been worried you would end up a spinster." "I was worried about a lot of things," Lydia admitted, looking up at Parker, who squeezed her hand. "But I should not have been. Everything worked out exactly as it was supposed to." On the train ride back to Colorado, Parker held her close as she mourned the sister she had grown apart from but still loved. "I am glad you were there with me," Lydia said. "I do not think I could have faced it alone." "You will never have to face anything alone again," Parker promised. "We are in this together until the very end, whatever that looks like." They had many good years left. They watched their children have children of their own, creating a sprawling family tree that seemed to branch through all of Trinidad and beyond. The store that Lydia had built continued to thrive, now under Samuel's capable management, but still bearing the name Vance and Ashford. They became pillars of the community, the couple everyone pointed to as an example of enduring love. Parker passed away in his sleep in the winter of 1918, at the age of 77. He had spent the day before working in his woodshop, building a cradle for yet another great-grandchild, and had come to bed tired but content. Lydia woke in the morning to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. The doctor said his heart had simply stopped, worn out after a long and full life. Lydia grieved deeply, as was natural after 36 years of marriage to her soulmate, but she did not fall apart. Parker had given her too much strength, too much confidence in herself for that. She continued to live in the quarters above the store, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, remaining sharp and engaged with the world until her own passing 5 years later, at the age of 79. They buried her next to Parker in Trinidad Cemetery, on a hill overlooking the town they had both loved. At the funeral, Samuel shared the story his mother had told him many times, about the mail-order groom who had rejected her and the cowboy who had seen her true worth. "My father used to say that my mother was perfect at every age, including whatever age she happened to be that day," Samuel told the assembled mourners. He never saw her as too old or too anything. He just saw her as exactly right. And because he saw her that way, she saw herself that way too. That is the greatest gift you can give someone, the gift of seeing them truly and loving what you see. On Lydia's gravestone, beneath her name and dates, Parker had arranged for words to be carved long before his death. He had chosen them carefully, wanting to leave one final message for the woman who had transformed his life. The inscription read, "Perfect at every age, beloved wife, mother, friend." And so Trinidad remembered Lydia Vance Ashford, not as a woman who had been too old or past her prime, but as someone who had built something lasting and beautiful out of rejection and heartbreak. She had been told she was not enough, and she had found someone who knew she was everything. Her story became local legend, told and retold to encourage others not to give up on love, not to accept society's narrow definitions of when and how happiness could be found. The store stood for another 50 years before finally closing, but the lessons Lydia and Parker had taught lived on in their descendants and in the community they had helped build. Love was not limited by age or circumstance. Worth was not determined by youth or conventional beauty. And the right person would see you truly, completely, perfectly, no matter when you met them or how many years you had already lived. That was the legacy of the woman who was called too old, and the cowboy who said she was perfect at every age, including that one.